But I would invite you just to look again at Jean's picture. I'm going to wheel it out. It's a beautiful picture. Thank you, Jean. And I was actually taking the kids out when you were describing it, so I probably got it wrong, but it made me think of the Sea of Galilee, which is, and this bench is lovely. And I guess I'd invite you this morning to maybe imagine yourself sat on that bench overlooking the Sea of Galilee several thousand years ago. Maybe imagine yourself as one of the lesser well-known disciples, like a Thaddeus or something. And we've been walking through the book of Mark chapter by chapter each week for a couple of months now. And this is chapter 8 today. And chapter 8, in my mind, is one of the really important chapters in Mark, because everything that happens before has this feeling of celebration, like it's almost a bit of a romp. It's great fun. But then from chapter 8 onwards, things change. In chapter 8, people are a bit confused about who Jesus is. Maybe this morning you feel a little bit confused about who Jesus is. But then onwards, you start to feel the cross looming over the story a little bit. And so things change. And this morning, we're going to start to try and feel that change. And to do that, what I need all of you to do is to imagine, as I said, perhaps that you're sat at that bench, thinking about the past few years, because you have been walking with this man, Jesus, as one of his followers for a year or two. And I think it's fair to say that without doubt, given everything we've learned the past few weeks, it would have been the best years of your life. Life with him, sometimes when you read it, feels like one long party. There's a lot of food and laughter. There's a lot of fun going on. There's always a table crowded with the wrong kinds of people, of sinners and tax collectors and fishermen. But based on what I can tell, the wrong kinds of people seem to be a lot more fun. I don't know if that's what I meant to take away from Mark, but I did. Wherever Jesus goes, every day something happens. You never would know what it would be like, would you? You'd never know what to expect at the start of a day, but every day someone's life would be changed forever. We heard a little bit of that this morning. It's still going on 2,000 years later. But there are stories of deaf people hearing. You've got stories of lame people walking. Crooked people turning their lives around when they hear about his way of living. And then I just imagine the wonder of it all, how it would build up over those 2 years. And then at times there's a real sense of awe in some of the stories. The one that always strikes me is the moment where Jesus takes a dead girl by the hand, 12 years old. At this point in the story, her body's cold. And it's you, a few other disciples, and the girl. And he says 2 words. He goes, Talitha cum. And they're written like that in the Gospel of Mark because they're clearly etched into his memory. It means something like, little girl, get up. And what's so incredible about it is she gets up. And I don't know what it would do to how you see the world if you were seeing miracles like that every day of your life. At this point in the story where we are, it was only maybe a week or 2 ago that Jesus took a few small loaves of bread and turned them into enough food to feed 5,000 people. And then there was baskets to spare left over. You've seen him say a single word and watch demons run. The one particular story that maybe sticks in your mind is that there was a man who would prowl around the tombs outside a town. Chains couldn't hold him down. Adam told this story the other week. And he would cut himself night and day. And the whole town was terrified of this man for good reason. But Jesus wasn't at all afraid. He just walked up to him. And he asked the demon inside the man its name. Legion was the answer. Legion means something to the effect of Roman army, the occupying army. So fitting. But with one word from Jesus, and it was gone. And then the man was sitting there, calm, collected, clothed in his right mind for the first time in years. Jesus is still doing it today. We heard that earlier. And so you've been living this now for a couple of years of your life. And as I said, they're the best years of your life. And I just need you to try and keep imagining that as we flip the story for a moment. Because imagine the other day you walk out of town and there's a man on a cross by the road. Not Jesus, not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that crosses weren't rare back then. Crucifixion was a fact of life. You would have seen it a lot growing up because you were born under Roman occupation and the Romans were an incredibly cruel occupier. Another story is when your parents were young. The soldiers burned a town maybe an hour's walk from where you grew up. And then they lined the road outside of that town with more than 2,000 crosses. They left them up for months. The point being that there's a message behind that, and the message is, there is no hope. Don't fight back. This is a true story, and there were lots of them for me to choose from. The Romans take a third or more of everything you earn, and you earn so little that it pushes you over the brink into poverty, and most of the people you know are also incredibly poor. And the reason they have to tax you so hard is they need to pay all the armies that occupy you, which is cruel. And then on every coin is the face of the man in Rome, the Emperor Caesar. And he calls himself God. He describes himself as God. He calls himself your rescuer. That's how he describes himself, as the rescuer of the world. But the problem is his rescue comes in the form of those legions. But then you, as you've grown up, you've always known the promises that your people hold to. You've sung them since you were just a little boy, that one day a son of David would sit on the throne of Israel again, and the Gentiles that are occupying you would be booted out for the final time, and God's kingdom would be back with his people at last. You heard a rumor that this man you've been following for the past year or two can trace his line back to David. You start to wonder. You start to think. There's a word you pray every Passover. And that's the feast that remembers what happened the last time that God broke his people free from a cruel empire like Rome. That was Egypt. And that word is Hosanna. You say it every year. Hosanna means rescue us. It means rescue us. And you say that to yourself every day. God, rescue us. Because every day you're watching a pagan army grind down the people that you love. And yet, in the middle of all this, it's this man that you've been following. In the middle of all this is Jesus. And you started following him the way that people followed any teacher at the time. He called you and you followed. It was a privilege to be asked. You wanted to learn. But at some point, somewhere along the way, it stopped being only about the learning. When does a teacher become a leader? Because there's something about this man. There's a strength, perhaps a steadiness, a resolve. When he speaks, a room falls silent. When he speaks, a storm goes silent. And so I need you to keep imagining all this, that on the one hand, this has been your life, this sort of oppression and cruelty that I just described a little bit. But then on the other hand, there's those promises that you carry. And there's this teacher that you're following. There's the miracles and the way that you're wandering. Because what's happening is that you've started to believe. And you don't let yourself, not out loud, not on purpose, because it's too big and too dangerous of a thing to do. It's too costly. People have ended up on crosses beside the road for believing in far less. But you believe anyway. And you find that with ever meaning to, without ever having done it on purpose. You've started to believe. Last night, it was just you and the other close followers of Jesus gathered round the fire. And someone finally said it. Nobody argued. They said, he could be the one. And everyone around the fire knew exactly what that meant. And then there's one of those silences. It feels an important moment. The one is the one to do to Rome what Rome has done to you. That's what you think. You think of your children, your mother, how they live in fear. And then you think again of the man and that weight of authority that he carries. And you imagine him speaking to a different kind of legion. You imagine him telling that one to leave. What would happen then, you wonder? Because we often these days, we talk about how the disciples have misunderstood the mission of Jesus, and there's maybe a bit of judgment, and we think they're very silly for having thought that Jesus was here to boot out the Romans. But I hope you can maybe imagine yourself now in their shoes a little bit. Imagine living that life. Because they weren't wrong for wanting Jesus to cast the legions from Israel. I know for certain that you or I in their shoes would have wanted the exact same thing. And it's precisely how we would have understood Jesus' mission had we followed him. Anyway, back to our story. For the first time, Jesus has just done something that doesn't make any sense to you at all. We've set course to the wrong side of the lake, the Sea of Galilee, because there's the Jewish side and the Gentile side. And you're now on track for the first time in your life to land aground the Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the unclean side, the kind of place your mother tells you to never go. But there, in front of a crowd of Romans, in front of a crowd of Greeks and Canaanites, he does the same thing again. Bread for thousands of people from only a few loaves. Baskets to spare. So he's just done for them exactly what he did for you and your people. And all you're able to think is, if you are the rescuer, what are you doing here? Because these are the people we're meant to be rescued from. They're not the people we're meant to be out doing miracles for. So what's going on? But later he turns to you on the way back and asks, don't you understand? Don't you understand? Maybe that's what Jesus is asking you this morning. In this case, the answer is honestly no. Didn't understand. Anyway, back on the Jewish side of the lake, you get out the boat, and on the edge of a village, something happens that for the second time in a day you've never seen before, and maybe not this time in a good way. Because they bring Jesus a blind man, and they beg him to restore the blind man's sight. And he does what he always does, a little bit differently this time. He doesn't just speak to the man. He takes the man by the hand and he leads him away from the village, away from the crowd. And then he spits on the man's eyes, lays his hands on him, and then he asks him something that you have never once heard Jesus ask before. Do you see anything? Do you see anything? He asks. You've watched this man still a storm with one word. You've watched him take a dead child by the hand and give him back to her mother alive. He's never had to ask before. He's never had to check in halfway through. But the man looks up and he says, I can see people, but they look like blurry trees walking around. So the man can see the shape, but the details are wrong. So he's got the shape, but the details are wrong. And so Jesus lays his hands on the man's eyes for a second time. And now when the man looks, he can see everything. It's clear, it's as it should be. You walk on, For a few days, this churns over in your mind. Perhaps you feel a bit unsettled by it. Why does it bother you as much as it did that the healing didn't seem to take first time round? Anyway, over the next few days, you're aiming north. You're a very long way north on foot, really, to a town called Caesarea Philippi, which is named after Caesar. Its name basically means Caesar's town. And of course, that's the man in Rome who calls himself the God. And I think for this part of the story to really make sense, I need you to sort of work your imagination even harder for the next few moments, because a great red cliff looms over the town. And you can look at pictures of it online. Carved across the face of the cliff are lots of niches, and each niche is filled with a shrine to a different pagan god. And there's candles and incense and tiny little figurines, all looking down on you from above, out of the rock. And then at the base of the cliff is a deep black cave. And inside the cave is a still, ice-cold pool. And it's so deep that supposedly no one has ever touched the bottom before. And it is believed to be the gates of Hades, or the gates of death, that means. And nothing that ever goes into those gates ever comes back out. It just sinks down and is gone forever. And then in front of that, blazing white in the sun, is an enormous marble temple to, of all people, Caesar. It is a temple raised to the man who conquered you. And here he's worshipped as a god, whilst those old dark gods leer on from their niches in the cliff. And all of this is packed into one small place. And it's here, of every place in the world, that Jesus chooses to ask you the question. Because he could have asked you in Jerusalem. That would have made a lot of sense. He could have asked you in the River Jordan. He could have asked you in Bethlehem. He could have asked you anywhere but here. This is the place he picks. And he stops in the most intensely pagan, the most intensely imperial place in the world. And he turns and he asks the 12 of you, who do you say I am? There, of all places, he asked, who do you say I am? And this is one of those questions that turns a life. When you answer that question finally, your life is never the same again. We heard about that with the baptisms. It is a no going back question. And you can feel that as he asks it. It's like the land is tilting under you because you know your answer. Here in the shadow of Caesar's temple, there is only one answer that could be right. And it all comes flooding up again as you think about it. The man on the cross you saw outside of town the other day, the roads that your parents walked lined with thousands more of the same. Everything Rome has ever taken from you. You think of the face on the coin that calls himself God. You think of the years at the boot and your family and the shame you feel from having never done anything about it. Stood there surrounded by these symbols of everything you hate. Surely there can only be one answer to that question. And the answer is, he is the promised one. He's the one who ends this. He is the one who's the heir of David, who will throw Caesar down and give you back your lands. He is the rescuer. Surely. And you say all of that in your heart in just half a moment. But Peter says it out loud. He goes, you're the rescuer. And Jesus, standing with the black mouth of the rock behind him, the gates of Hades behind him, answers, blessed are you, Peter. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades themselves will not prevail against it. And he keeps talking. And you lean in. Because this is the moment. This is the moment you're going to get that battle plan at last that you've been secretly waiting for. And in a way, it's what you get. But you were expecting armies. Instead, he begins to teach you that he must suffer, that he'll be rejected, And that doesn't make any sense because everywhere he goes, the people adore him. And then that he'll be killed on, of all things, a cross. So Peter grabs him, takes him aside, and tells him to stop. You're very relieved. You wanted to do the same. But Jesus turns to Peter, and you can hear it from where you are, and he says, "Get behind me, Satan." Silence follows. You remember the thing that's been bothering you for days, that's been churning around your mind. The blind man, the healing that didn't take, the blurred vision where the man had the right shape, but the details were all wrong. Because what you realize is that you're looking at the man again. But this time it's Peter. You realize this time it's you. Because Peter and you have seen who Jesus is. You've understood he is the rescuer. He has the shape right. He is the rescuer. But he's got the details wrong. Because it was more true than Peter was able to understand. Because Peter has aimed the rescue too small. And you realize in that moment, it's laid out in front of you at Caesarea Philippi. You've got the soldiers, the emperor, the gods, and the gates of death. Because it's not just Rome. Remember Legion, the demon army named after the occupying Roman army. The darkness isn't named after Rome. It's the power behind Rome. It's the power behind all of those things that bend the world out of shape a little bit. Sin and death and Satan and far more besides. Because you had the imagination to believe Jesus could cast the legions from Israel. You could imagine that. But you could never imagine being truly free. What you expected was Jesus to take up the sword and to lead the people against Rome. But Jesus isn't going to take the sword, and it's not because Rome's too big for him, but because it's too small. The real enemy can't be beaten with a sword. Death doesn't lose fights. If you remember the pool, and what he called it, the gates of Hades, nothing that goes in comes out. There's one way that death loses, and that's when someone descends to the very depths of Hades and then comes out the other side. So if you remember the man on the cross, the road out of town, Rome's weapon there is used to teach you not to hope. And that, of all things, is the weapon that Jesus picks up. Not the sword, the cross. Because the rescuer wins by dying on the cross to bring back hope. And so Peter and the other disciples, they weren't wrong to want to be rescued. We would have wanted the same. But Jesus wanted to rescue them from something bigger. And I think we're all like Peter and the blind man. We see Jesus and we might know him as our rescuer. But he's still blurry. And the risk is that when we blur Jesus, we fill in the gaps with what we want him to be. We might think that he's here to rescue our finances. We might think he's here to rescue our broken relationships. We might think he's here to rescue our health. And he is. Let me be clear, he is. But that and so much more. Because when we blur Jesus, we shrink him. Because Jesus is here to rescue from sin, from addiction. He is here to rescue you from death and to break the stranglehold of darkness in each of our lives. And the worst thing we could do is to settle for the blurry version who will only rescue your finances. And so to finish, I want to ask you the question that Jesus asked the blind man. And the question is, can you see? Can you see? Maybe the band wants to pop back up. Because if your sight's blurry, as I think it is for all of us a little bit, then I think we need to come to Jesus as the blind man did for that second touch. Maybe it's the third, the fourth, the fifth touch by this point in your life. But we need to keep coming back and to start seeing Jesus ever more clearly. So to finish, I just want to pray. Jesus, I thank you that everything we read in Mark is true. I thank you for what an incredible person you are. I thank you that you are the rescuer. And I pray that each of us in our lives, whether we're facing addiction, poverty, brokenness, whatever it is, I pray that we would know your rescue in our lives. But God, may we see you clearly and not stop there. I pray for each of us this morning that if we need it, we would come to you today for that second touch, as that blind man did. And I pray wherever we're at in our relationship with you, that we would leave today with you a little bit more in focus than you were when we walked in the room. And Holy Spirit, I just pray that you work in each of our hearts, because it's only through you are we able to ever see the Son clearly. Amen.